I'm going to upload my presentation. This is my presentation. Economic and Management Science, Grade 8. The topic of today, we are going to do the accounting equation, but this will be the basics for the accounting equation, because before you can go to do the amounts, we must first do the basics of accounting equations. I'm Mr. Hlaba. I'm going to take you through this presentation. Now, my presentation will be dealing with the meaning of equation, accounting equation components, grouping of components, account of components, and then lastly, we'll do the balancing account equation sides. Now, accounting, the equation, especially the equation, here we have two sets of equation. You can see that this one is the sides are the same, but if you check this one, the sides are not the same, and that will clearly tell you that things that have been put here are not equal. They are equal on this side, but here they are not equal. Let's check then. Let's check. The reason is because 5 and 5, that causes this two sides to be equal. But here, 5 and 9, that resulted to this sides not being equal. So if you see this situation, just remember that this is accounting equation. That is the purpose of accounting equation. Accounting equation, both sides must be equal, not 5 is to 9. So this one is not accounting equation. Just know that in future, when you deal with accounting equation, if your sides are like this, just know that your sides are not balancing, and then it is not correct. So there are only two sides in accounting equation. Those two sides must always be equal. We have left and right hand side, debit and credit. Now, the accounting equation components, normally we have English language, because every subject has its own terminology. Business property and possession, just remember that in accounting we refer to them as assets. Business properties, possession, we refer to them as assets. Owner's contribution, if an owner is contributing something to the business, just know that this is the equity of the business. It's an owner's equity. And then business debts. Business debt or credit, if a business is lending money from certain people or certain companies, we refer to them as liabilities. We don't say it's debts. We refer to them as liabilities. So these three, they form part of accounting equation: assets, owner's equity, and liabilities. So learners, when we will get to the calculations or the amounts, just remember that equity, whatever the amount that is in the owner's equity, must be in the assets also. And whatever the amount that is in the liabilities must also be in the assets. But at the end of the day, when you add owner's equity plus liability, they must give you the assets. Owner's equity plus liability must be equals to the assets. Just remember that. Now we move. As I've mentioned in the last slides, assets is equals to owner's equity plus liabilities. Assets is equals to owner's equity plus liabilities. Just remember that this equation, it forms part of account equation. Assets, I've said, is a properties of the business. Owner's equity is owner's contribution to the business. That is why we refer to it as a owner's equity. Whatever the owner is contributing to the business, it will form part of owner's equity. Liabilities are the debts of the business. We don't say the debts, but we refer to it as a liabilities. And then, learners, when we move, as I've mentioned about this equation, assets, they must always be equals to owner's equity plus liability. Assets must always be equals to owner's equity plus liability. This equation must balance. It must not be the same as that one that you saw where there is 5 here and there is 9. If it is 5 here, there should be 5 here. Whatever the case might be, 5, it was caused by what? By 2 of owner's equity and 3 of liability. And then when we add them together, they must give you this assets, which is 5 on this side. Now, what is important, what is very, very important, learners, is here when we talk about the assets. What are the assets account? Very important. What are these assets account? Because every time when we talk about the assets, you must know that what are those accounts that fall under assets. The accounts that falls under the assets, we refer to them as land and building, vehicle, equipment, bank, trading stock, and debtors. These are the accounts that falls under the assets. And then our owner's equity accounts. Our owner's equity account is capital, drawings, incomes, rent income, interest income, donation, creditors, allowances. This one are the ones that I did in the previous presentation. I explained in detail, you see, the different types of incomes and expenses that we have. So those expenses that we have, they fall under the owner's equity. And also, we also have on this side the liability accounts. Liability accounts, we may refer to creditors, bank overdraft, loan, mortgage, bond. But this one, you know it when you get to grade 10 in details, when you do them in details, because now we are on the foundation. Let's continue. Now, assets account, as I've mentioned, land and building vehicle, this must form part of the owner's equity. It must say all these assets is equals to this owner's equity plus liability. They must be equal to this asset. So when you do them in calculation, when you get to the calculation, you must always remember that your equation must be like this. If your equation is not like this, just remember that it's not correct. But what is important for now is to know the classification of accounts. Now, to classify this account, we are going to indicate whether the following accounts falls under the assets, owner's equity, or liability. These are the possible questions that normally comes every time when there is an introduction of the account equation. You first have to know the accounts. Stationery. Stationery is an owner's equity. Equipment, it's an asset. Capital, it's an owner's equity, as I mentioned. Creditors is forms part of liability. Rent income is an owner's equity. Trading stock is an asset. Drawing C is an owner's equity. Creditors allowance is an owner's equity. Loan is a liability. Debtors is an asset. Bank is an asset. Debtors allowance is an owner's equity. And lastly, bank overdraft is a liability. So, learners, you have to know this account. For now, before we can go to doing the calculations, The very important thing that you have to know this classification of accounts first. So before the end of this week, just make sure that you practice this classification of account so that when you go to the transaction, it becomes easy for you. When they talk about stationery, then you know stationery is part of owner's equity. It affects the owner's equity. And when they talk about equipment, you know that equipment is a part of assets. That is the end of my presentation. The quiz question will be posted on the WhatsApp group. Thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation. I don't know if there is someone who can hear me. Thank you very much for Mr. Potgieter. Thank you, Menier. I will post the quiz on the group. Thank you.
Yes, goodbye.